Welcome back, friends. We want to let you know what's going on M Go Blue podcast already out. You've got the post-game episode from Monday's men's basketball opener versus Cleveland State. It was a great start. That's on Defend the Block. Still to come. We've got the Conquering Heroes, and we're going to start our Hall of Honor episodes. The first one this week is men's soccer inductee Knox Cameron. In the Trenches preview episode on Thursday afternoon. That's the Indiana Hoosiers preview episode, some keys, a little bit of a pep talk, and then the post game on Saturday night. And obviously the Inside Michigan Football Coaches Show is there as well, which happened on Monday night. And now at this time, we talked men's basketball about how they had that great game against Cleveland State. The voice that you heard broadcasting that game is our very own Brian Boesch. Mr. Boesch, what was it like? I know that you've had some quote-unquote exhibition games, but to call that game last night and see this team start to take shape.
I got to learn how to broadcast a little bit differently. That was fast. I got to get out quicker for Terry. It was a lot of fun. My cat here was super excited about it. Bernadette, she loved it too. So she'll pop on here. It looks like, oh my goodness.
You got the best part.
Yeah. But yeah, super impressive from Michigan. Now, Cleveland State is a team that is susceptible to some of the things that Michigan had a lot of success with in that game. So a much stiffer test comes against Wake Forest on Sunday and then TCU a week from Friday. But it's tough not to be excited. I talked about it on Defend the Block. When so much felt new and different, it's almost overwhelming and you don't know where to start, but that's how different it felt. The other thing I want to make sure we talk about, how about the women on Monday night?
Yeah.
Taking number one reigning national champion South Carolina to the absolute brink. If you haven't heard the name Sila Swords yet, and you're a Michigan fan, where have you been?
Tune in,
Yeah, she has an opportunity to have the type of impact that we've seen some of the stars in recent women's college basketball make. She is that good. Liv Olson is just as highly regarded and rated. Jordan Hobbs is a senior, has a chance to take a step. So yeah, it's one day in. One day does not make a basketball season, but it's tough not to be really optimistic about both programs, the men and the women.
Yeah, no, it's fun to watch, and it's fun to see, obviously, in the basketball side of things, the transition from the previous regime to see what Dusty May is doing, the players, athletes that he's brought in, but then how he's going to take this team from where they are now to the end of the season. And I mean, I don't know what the rest of the Big Ten looks like. You're the expert in that category, but it really feels like, one, it's going to be a respectable team. They're going to continue to improve, and it feels like it's going to be a tournament appearance.
Yeah. Remember last year it was a 3-0 start, and I remember how optimistic I was, and many were.
When Michigan different.
It does. No doubt. Yeah. No doubt. I think to your point about the Big Ten, coming into the season, Ken Pom had every Big Ten team as a top 75 team in the country. Now, I look at Ken Pom a ton. It's a little bit incomplete before a season starts, especially with the movement in college basketball. But let's just assume every Big Ten team's a top 100 team. That means that every game in the league is a bear. I think you're going to see the difference between maybe a Big Ten team that's contending for a top 4 seed in the NCAA tournament and a Big Ten team that is hoping to sneak in to the NCAA tournament. The difference might just be in those coin flip 1 and 2 possession games. Mm-hmm. So we need to see that, and non-conference play is important. So that's why this team scheduled challenging in the non-conference, and I think we are seeing why, because, I mean, they weren't even healthy. Reuben Jones, who this coaching staff loves, didn't even play. So a lot of optimism, excitement, and it's a fun brand of basketball, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's going to be fun to watch. I can't wait to see more. But we've got football before we start even turning the page to basketball, even though it's going on.
We do, no doubt. November, crazy fun, crazy busy. Let's lock and load here on our 7 from 77. I want to talk about Saturday's performance. How would you grade this performance now that you've had a chance to look back on it? I would ask for a letter, and also just in comparison to the rest of Michigan's efforts this season, because the first 3 losses of the season, I think, came with a caveat with a piece of frustration or wonder of what could have been. Sharon Moore put it really well on Monday night, I thought, in saying that the Washington game beat this team twice. I think this was the clear example of the season where, hey, a better team just came in here and won.
Yes. So obviously Texas came in here. They were the better team. They won. Oregon, clearly the better team, and they went away with a win. And what I was hoping to see. So I guess the letter grade would be C-, maybe a D+.
Huh?
Yeah.
Really?
And because I was hoping to see more improvement from how they played against, especially starting the game, how they played against Texas versus how they played against Oregon. And when you're talking about starting fast, you can't have 2 3-and-outs on offense. And then, okay, you got the benefit of a turnover on special teams. I believe it was 5 plays from the 35-yard line. You punch it in. That's what you're supposed to do when you get a short field. But anytime it just didn't feel like they had much of a rhythm on offense. The rushing attack, which Michigan is one of those teams that they have to be able to run the ball to create offense. It was not. It just wasn't what you need it to be. And then defensively, when you look at the drives to start the game, it just was. Again, it wasn't starting fast. It was 2 touchdowns, and it felt like on that first drive. All right, Oregon came out, and we talked about it in the pregame where they were a short passing attack, and it was going to be dink and dunk. They would take some shots down the field, but in 7 pass plays in the opening scoring drive for Oregon, 5 of them were behind the line of scrimmage. There was only 2 that went downfield, and I'm not even talking about way downfield. One of them was obviously the touchdown, and the second was the first down conversion on 3rd down, and that was about a 7 or 8 yard pass. So I just didn't see the adjustments being made, because then it was a 6-play, 75-yard drive for a touchdown that you needed to see from a defense that if they're going to do that, first of all, it was on film. Second of all, they start doing it to you, and I didn't see the adjustments being made. And now, granted, all right, Will Johnson was out, Jair Hill was out. You had Zeke Berry playing the corner position. Normally he's the nickel. And we heard from Coach on Monday night that he thought he actually did pretty well. The one time I think I know that he gave up a first down and got beat was a communication error. He just didn't get the call and wasn't in position at the snap of the ball. But again, why are we having those mistakes now? New position, but at this point of the year, you should be able to make that transition. That call should be relayed in time for you to be able to at least start the play in the right spot.
Number 2 on our 7 from 77. Let's talk about that defensive boost in the second half, because it really did feel like a tale of 2 halves defensively. And how can that carry over to Bloomington? Because you can't play 30 minutes of defense in Bloomington. You certainly can't play 30 minutes of defense in Columbus here in a few weeks if you want to have a chance. These offenses are too good down the stretch. So how can they turn a 30-minute performance into a 60?
Well, do more what you did in the second half. You come out and it's 3 and out to start the second half. That is so important. And it's not every game. You don't have to start with the 3 and out, because we all talk about the scripted drives and a team is ready for every single look on the play because they've studied that for 48 hours, and they've poured over every single play, every single look. But if you can get out and force a punt on the opening drive in the second half, they did that with a 3 and out. Gives the offense a little bit better field position. Michigan started with the ball, it was on the 25-yard line, but they go down and score. Now all of a sudden, one thing leads to another, and we start talking about complementary football, the 3 and out and all this. And then in the second half there, the second possession, that's the one where the defense actually got off the field. They were ready. They were taking oxygen on the sidelines. And then all of a sudden, the special teams penalty. And instead of the offense going back out there with a little bit of rhythm, a little bit of excitement, some momentum, some confidence from the scoring drive, defense has to go back out because it causes a first down. And they ultimately end up bowing their neck inside the red zone and forcing a field goal. But the momentum at that time was lost. So it's really, I think, for this team and where they are mentally and emotionally, it's really important to start the game off with a good possession. Either side of the ball, it's got to be a good possession.
Number 3 on today's 7 from 77. Many times this year, and understandably, deservedly so, we have brought up the dependence that Michigan's offense has on Colston Loveland as a critique of the rest of the offense's skill weapons. And yeah, they need more from everybody around Colston. I just want people to, and I think people do, but I want to take a moment to appreciate what he's done as someone who put a lot of that Texas loss on him in a game where even if he plays like this, Michigan probably doesn't win. But he has 49 of Michigan's 128 catches. That's 38%. And he has 523 of Michigan's 1,209 receiving yards. That's 43%. Can you put into perspective just how difficult that is for a tight end who hasn't even played every game this year to do? I mean, if you were to break it down in just games he's played, these numbers are around 50%.
Right. And so from Colston Loveland's perspective, it's amazing. And he's a guy that can line up wide in a wide receiver's position. He can line up in the slot. He can line up, just off the tackle's butt. He can line up at the line of scrimmage. And no matter how he comes off the ball, he finds a way to get open. Now the question is, how do you continually get him the ball? And I think Davis Warren is really getting comfortable of seeing 18 down the field and finding ways to get him the ball. I think Kirk Campbell the light bulb has gone on that says, hey, we need to get him the ball more often, because even if you go back to the Michigan State game, when was Michigan the best? When they were able to get the ball in the hands of Colston Loveland. Same thing against Oregon. When did Michigan look the best? And in any game that he's in, when has Michigan looked the best? Getting the ball in the hands of Colston Loveland. Now, not looking at it from the Colston Loveland perspective, because he is a big target. I'll go back to his perspective. Big target, great athlete, great hands, and is a reliable guy in terms of being where he's supposed to be, reading defenses, studying, all of those things, puts himself in position for success, ultimately putting the offense in position for success. But when you look at those numbers, 38% of catches are Colston Loveland, 43% of receiving yards are Colston Loveland. Where's the rest of the offense? That's, I mean, you got to take the good with the bad. Good for Colston. Great target, great weapon, but you need more production from whether it's other tight ends, but mainly more receivers stepping up and doing the things that Colston Loveland does and making plays.
No, totally. And we can do two things at once, right? Talk about how great Loveland's been. I mean, he's a Mackey Award winner to me. We'll see if it happens, because, oftentimes that does follow with winning. But he's done is.
Well, where we're going to see, his true value is maybe not in college football awards, because like you mentioned, sometimes it comes with winning. Teams that are in the college football playoffs, there's attention, there's all those things. Where it's really going to come is in the draft analysis. Where is he drafted? And I think he'll be the number one tight end off the board. And I don't even know that it's close.
Yeah, I think he's a first rounder, and we'll see where that goes, because tight ends are at a premium in the NFL, and they are valued significantly in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
Number 4 on our 7 from 77. Let's talk about the Indiana Hoosiers, as no one but probably the person who many have Googled here over the last couple of months, Curt Cignetti, would have thought they are unbeaten. It's maybe the best story in college football nationally. Could you have ever imagined this? And just how improbable is this for a program that truly has not had this type of success in the modern era?
Well, and so let's all go back to his initial, whether it was a press conference or he was at Assembly Hall for announcing his hiring, when he did have the comment of, I just win wherever I go, Google it. We all laughed and said, you're at Indiana, dude. And now he's the one laughing, saying, I'm a dude at Indiana. And I mean, what he has been able to do there, and it was mining the transfer portal, bringing some of the players that he knew and knew him, knew his expectations, knew his style, knew his culture, bringing them from JMU, but then adding to it at every single position. I mean, when you look at the number of transfers and those in the 2 deep, Like you could make up an entire roster of 2 deep players that are from the transfer portal. So on the flip side, because we like to look at this from both sides, right? It also shows you how quickly you can turn around a program. And this is the era of college football where it's transfer portal. Players can transfer as many times and as often as they want. It's NIL. There are so many things that can turn a program's future around more rapidly now than at any time in the history of college football. So it does give you some hope when you're a team that's sitting there with, 4 losses and 5 losses or 6 losses and trying to figure out what does next year look like. But for Indiana, I would have never thought that we'd be sitting here, and some of it, yeah, people can say, look at their schedule. All right, let's do that. And compare that to Michigan's schedule from last year. And I'm not doing Indiana radio, but up until Michigan played Penn State last year, the schedules are almost identical in terms of level of competition. They have taken care of business. And if you look at Notre Dame, right, they have that really bad loss to Northern Illinois. Well, Indiana has played teams of that caliber and absolutely demolished them. And so you look around college football and you say, well, is Indiana for real? And by now, if you don't think Indiana's for real, then go watch a soccer game over in Europe. Like you have no idea what is going on in Bloomington or in college football these days. It is for real.
Of all things, why a soccer match in Europe?
Because you don't have any attention of what's going on here in the States. And you're not paying attention to football.
In Australia with all the punters, right?
Right. Yeah. No, that's Doug Karsh. That's what he does in his spare time. He's looking for future kickers for other teams so that he can quiz me on where they're from.
I know. I talked to him. It was a very quick trigger from him on Saturday because their backup was from Perth, and he mentioned it to you. He didn't have a chance to let it really sit. Unfortunately, it could have been great this weekend. I long for the weeks where the punter's not from Australia because it just makes that game. No, actually, John, he's from St. Paul, Minnesota. How about that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And this is how little I care. Like, I know the questions come, but I don't want to take the 30 seconds to look up where a punter is from or born.
Maybe you and I sync up and I'll let you know where the punter's from for like Northwestern and you can surprise them.
Okay. That's fine. Yeah. We got 3 opportunities left. So sure.
Yeah. All right. Deal. Fair enough. Before we continue talking European soccer and punter,
we got off the rails.
Yeah, we did. Yeah. Once you said this wasn't Indiana radio, which it's not, confirmed.
Yeah.
Anywho, John, if our fans are in need of metal, we have the perfect place for them to go.
Oh, we sure do, Brian. And that's Alro Metals outlet, makes buying metals and plastics fast and simple. Alro's retail stores are open to the public to walk in and shop. Their customers include machine shops, job shops, contractors, welders, hobbyists, artists, and do-it-yourselfers. Also, Alro Metals outlet stores offer saw cutting and shearing while you wait. Michigan locations include Ann Arbor, Grand Rapids, Jackson, Kalamazoo, Lansing, Livonia, Troy, and Warren. You can learn more at alro.com.
Number 5 on our 7 from 77 Big Ten storylines. Imagine radio in central Pennsylvania right now. Ohio State 20, Penn State 13.
We're recording this on Tuesday. Central Pennsylvania. It's all political.
You know what? There are some Penn State fans who are thrilled about that.
Right. That's exactly.
Election day, they're the only people who are excited about the political text that they're getting blown up with. Yes. Great point. But, boy, listen, that for Ohio State might have been a, survive and advance type game. The Penn State angle to me is more interesting because if this is a 4-team model, Penn State season is over. It's a year of malaise and frustration and wonder. Now, they still are more likely to me to go 11-1 than any other potential result. Now, they might be more likely to not go 11-1 than go 11-1, but that is their most likely record if we're talking 7-5, 8-4, whatever. But boy, if there was ever an opportunity for Penn State unbeaten, get Ohio State at home, you don't have Michigan on the schedule. I know Michigan's not, what it had been the previous 3 years, but this is the most reasonable Penn State schedule in a long, long time. and you go up 10-0 and you still lose, and you have that sequence at the goal line to try to tie it that just felt, I mean,
times.
oh my gosh, it was rough. Where does your mind go in all of this, other than James Franklin?
Well, they're going to get a second chance. They will. They're going to be in the college football playoffs because they've got 2 home games, Washington, and they end the season against Maryland. They're at Purdue. They're at Minnesota. And the Minnesota game, okay, not a huge brand, not a huge, one where you're going to look at it and go, okay, they're on a 4-game run right now. And they're going to play Rutgers before they get a bye week and play Penn State. But they beat a ranked Illinois team. They looked dominant against Maryland. They beat USC when USC was ranked number 11. So the quality of that win will help boost Penn State. Not that they need the boosting because it's going to be a 1-loss Big Ten team, and I think we kind of believe that Penn State brand 1 loss in the Big Ten, they're going to be a college football playoff team. So they're not going to get a bye week in the first round of the playoffs. I do believe they make the playoffs, and they'll get that opportunity, whether it's against Ohio State or whatever playoff team that they're going to face. They'll get a chance. They'll get an opportunity to make some corrections and get better.
Any other takeaways from last week? There were certainly some relevant finals in terms of just the full context of the Big Ten. Iowa blasting Wisconsin, Washington. Basically, I thought a must-win for them to have a chance to go bowling. They eked past USC at home. That bowl streak for Nebraska has not been officially ended yet. They lose to UCLA 27-20. And then in an odd, I think a lot of people wondered why Minnesota was favored, but that's why they have the big buildings in Las Vegas. Minnesota did beat Illinois in Champaign 25-17. And anything you took away from games outside of Happy Valley and Ann Arbor?
I mean, it was, disappointed Purdue didn't get their first Big Ten win. I mean, there's not a lot else going on. Indiana, I think it again, we're going to talk about them all week, but they got down 10-0, and then they flipped the switch and said, "Oh, this has been fun, and thank you for hosting us in East Lansing, Michigan State." They go on a run of 47 unanswered points. That to me was, again, another eye opener for what Cignetti and the strength of that Indiana offense.
Yeah, good point. I didn't throw their final in because we talked about them earlier, but you're right. I mean, it was dominant. It was really impressive because they were barely a touchdown favorite.
Yeah,
I think a lot of people were on Michigan State in the points in that game, and they just went and just walloped them. This weekend's notable games, not a ton. Ohio State hosts Purdue. Oregon gets Maryland. Those should both be blowouts. Hey, there's another chance for that first Purdue win, John.
Well, yeah, but I think the one to keep an eye on is, you mentioned Washington in that the desperation that they had of getting a win to make a bowl game, and Nebraska getting blown out, or not blown out, but losing to an inferior UCLA team. That's I think a case of a team beating you twice. They got stomped by Indiana, and they just couldn't recover. Now, I don't know if they ultimately do and make a bowl game. That, again, I don't really care, but we heard it from Sharon of how the loss to Washington kind of beat them twice when they traveled to Champaign. Is it possible that Penn State is going to have one of those moments, a Washington team that's desperate to make a playoff or to make a bowl game in the first year of their head coach, and now Penn State reeling from a tough loss against Ohio State? Now it's at home, but I mean, stranger things have happened.
Great point. Number 6 on our 7 from 77. Some thoughts on the other power conferences. In the SEC, kind of grinded out rivalry wins for Georgia and Tennessee. Dogs over a pretty pesky Gators team. I don't know what their upside is to get back to national relevance, but they've been a harder out than I think many people expected this year. Georgia wins that one 34-20. It just hasn't been a great year for Kentucky. They lose to Tennessee 28-18. South Carolina stuns Texas A&M emphatically 44-20. That's A&M's second loss. We talked about their potential path to go to the SEC championship game. That really makes it tough. And this weekend, we're going to get into this with your CFP bracket number 7, but there are 3 2-loss SEC teams with massive games. One of them is one of the marquee games in the league every year. Alabama at LSU, both teams 6-2, kind of feels like an elimination game. And then Georgia at Ole Miss, gotta have it for Lane Kiffin and the Rebels. This is one of the most anticipated seasons in Ole Miss history. If they're sitting 6-3 out of the CFP in early November, it's going to feel very, very hollow in Oxford.
It certainly will. And when you think about, the matchups, Georgia, Ole Miss is to me one of those teams that they're kind of like the Penn State of the SEC, where they're kind of there, can't seem to win the big one, but maybe every once in a while jump up and actually get it done. Do they against Georgia? I don't believe they do, but maybe they do. And Texas is kind of a forgotten team because they're only a 1-loss team, but they're coming off a bye. And I forget who they played 2 weeks ago, but it was a lesser opponent, and they won handily. And it was just kind of one of those like, okay, where has Texas been? Playing Florida this week. The game that kind of interests me the most is South Carolina and Vanderbilt. And I'm trying to figure out, is Vanderbilt for real? Because they're again ranked at 24, and like what? Okay, there's not much interest anywhere else. This is college football nerd looking at this. South Carolina is kind of that team that just is pesky and scrappy and fighting, and is Vanderbilt going to be able to maintain a top 25 ranking? Kind of that's maybe the angle I'm taking. Or does South Carolina, is that a pitfall for Vanderbilt?
Boy, the CFP expanding to 12 teams has made John care about South Carolina, Vanderbilt. That is remarkable.
Well, it has nothing to do with the CFP. It just has to do with Vanderbilt. Love the fact that they beat Alabama, that they've had some good wins. They've been an irrelevant program, and I love to see a team like Vanderbilt rise up and have a good year.
Well, 30 seconds ago, you're talking about the team that Texas beat that was irrelevant their last time out. That was Vanderbilt.
Right. Yes. No, I know. Yeah. When you say that out loud, I'm like, okay, yeah, that is the team that they played. But again, it was an under the radar game, but they only won, was it 3 points?
Yep. It was a late touchdown drive by Vandy to make it closer. But yes,
right.
The fact that they stayed within a team that I think Texas is one of the teams that can win the national championship, and Vanderbilt almost beat them. No doubt. It's a great story. So we'll see. We'll keep locked in on that one. Big 12. Iowa State's unbeaten run is over. That's a tough one to overcome because of how the Big 12 is. Texas Tech wins it in Ames 23-22. Also an upset of a team that was very much in the conference conversation, Kansas State. They lose to Houston. They're now 7-2, are the Wildcats, 24-19. This weekend, just to show you how condensed, how close the Big 12 is. So Iowa State's at Kansas. They are not, they're a heavier favorite than the other game I'm about to talk about. But still, that's not a gimme for the maybe second biggest surprise in the league against one of the biggest disappointments in the league in the Jayhawks. And unbeaten BYU.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest surprise in the Big 12 this year is a very slight, like field goal favorite at probably the most disappointing Big 12 team in Utah. The Utes are 4-4. Many had them pegged to be the champion of that league. There's only 2 teams in that league without multiple losses overall. There are only 3 teams without multiple losses in their conference. This is feeling more and more like a one-bid league unless BYU gets to the title game and loses.
Yeah, because then you get that automatic bid for whoever that opponent is. And we have no idea who they might face in the Big 12 championship game. That's the wild part of kind of, and how about this? Like, all right, Colorado 6-2. They're bowl eligible for the first time in a long time. Nobody really thought that Dion in his second year was going to have much, in terms of sustainability of winning. But they're one of those teams that you mentioned. They're only 1 loss in the Big 12. Can you imagine a world where, and I don't know, they're ranked 21, but when you look at Colorado and the rest of their schedule, all right, they've got Texas Tech this weekend. They're at Texas Tech. Who knows what happens? They host Utah. You mentioned disappointing. At Kansas, Oklahoma State. They could be one of those teams that is playing for a Big 12 championship against BYU? And is there a world where they win that and they get the auto bid in the college football playoffs in Deion's second year?
The louder it's been around Colorado's program externally, the worse they've been. This is the least Colorado's been talked about since Coach Brown got the job, and they're playing their best.
It's bizarre. It's a bizarre world in college football right now.
Forgive me for not memorizing the Big 12's tiebreaker setup, but if Colorado wins out, they don't definitely control their destiny. But I just don't see BYU or Iowa State winning out. I don't care who's on their schedule. I just haven't. Right. BYU maybe they might. They've been the one team that's been consistent, though. There have been some close games.
Well, BYU, as we mentioned, have Utah. They play Kansas, Arizona State, and Houston. Is there somebody on that remaining 4 games that you think they lose to?
It might be this weekend. That rivalry's fierce.
We'll see.
I know.
It'll be interesting.
It will. If they get past Utah on the road, then I'll believe they go undefeated. But I just, when you have those weird lines like Minnesota being favored in Champaign, you gotta pay attention, and we'll see. ACC, Miami, they pull away from Duke. It took a while. Hurricanes are weird, man. But they're 9-0. SMU keeps rolling in their return to a power conference. They beat previously unbeaten overall Pitt 48-25. Louisville wins at Clemson by 12. So right now, it looks like Miami and SMU are kind of on a collision course. And you talk about schedules, Miami and SMU's very reasonable. The Canes at Georgia Tech, home against Wake Forest, at Syracuse. SMU, home against BC, at Virginia. And then, of course, the classic ACC rivalry, SMU hosting Cal to finish the season. Rivalry week there in Fort Worth, right? No, they're Dallas, right?
I had the college football fan brain fart on the morning show because I thought SMU was in the Big 12 because they seem like a team that should be in the Big 12, but yet no, they're in the ACC, and you have these quote unquote classic matchups, ACC matchup between SMU and Cal. What are we doing? Like I can't even figure out where teams are. But then when you think about what's going on in the ACC and the weirdness that Miami did pull away from Duke, but man, it took them a little while, and they have been playing with fire so many times. And again, the team that we mentioned, classic ACC team, they should have lost when they were out at Cal earlier in the season.
I have one of those voice remotes. So Saturday night I was watching some games and I said Big Ten Network, but I don't think I don't think it picked up the network. So instead of going to USC at Washington on Big Ten Network, it went to the Wisconsin-Iowa game because I think even the remote knows that the Big Ten should be Wisconsin versus Iowa. Sure. And then I flipped over to the game that was truly in doubt. Jeff Levering, Jake Butt, great TV crew, by the way. They're both
Jake's doing a great job.
Yeah, they're a really, really good crew. All right. So we kind of discussed this a little bit, but I'm previewing your number 7, and it's the CFP rank. I'm not going to ask you to do brackets and where teams are going to go and all that stuff, but obviously we're recording this, midday Tuesday. For the audio listeners, this comes out Wednesday. So Ward Manuel and crew with the CFP will have their initial rankings out. I want to know just what your bracket would be. So the 5 auto bids and then the 7 at-large teams. So let's start with the auto bids. Right now, who are you locking in? Who are your champions of the 4 power conferences? And then I'm guessing Boise State for that group of 5?
Mountain West, yeah. I've got Oregon out of the Big Ten. Big team. Georgia out of the SEC. Miami out of the ACC. So that seems logical, right? Yeah, they seem like ACC and SEC teams. BYU out of the Big 12. That even seems like a good fit. Boise State out of the Mountain West. So those are my 5 auto bids. How about you?
I would agree. I think Oregon is the best team in the Big 10 right now. Big 12, I mean, I think they're the best. I'd be surprised if Miami didn't win the ACC. Honestly, I think Georgia might be the most tenuous just because I don't know. Yeah. They might not win this week because Ole Miss is playing for its season.
Right. And what happens in the Big Ten or the SEC championship game, and who does Georgia play? Who does Texas play? Is it Georgia,
those
Texas?
Those tiebreakers are going to be absurd.
Oh, in every conference. You mentioned, I don't even know what the tiebreakers are. You haven't memorized them for the Big 12. there are going to be multiple teams that are really upset, a lot of fan bases, because the tiebreakers in every conference without divisions right now are very obscure.
Yeah, I mean, right now in SEC play, I'm pulling it up here. There are 5 teams at 1 loss. And because some Georgia's 5-1. So actually, you know what? Georgia's got if they win this weekend, they're pretty much set because they'll be at 6-1. But you've got 5-1 A&M and Georgia and 3-1 Texas and LSU with the 2 byes and with some of the non-conference rivalries that a team like Georgia has later in the year.
Mhm.
And also, Louisiana Monroe or SC LSU Mud Dogs coming to town in the middle of November for that annual tradition. It's just a cluster. It really is. All right, 7 at-large teams, John.
All right, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. I've got.
You don't need to do 5 through 11. Just
Oh,
give
no,
it.
I'm just going to give you the 7 teams. I've got Ohio State, Penn State, Texas, Tennessee, Notre Dame, SMU, and Indiana.
So you only have 3 SEC teams in.
Yeah. Right. Again, I don't know what to do with it right now. I really don't.
Here are my 2 follow. I mean, again, this is a snapshot. There is a ton of time. This is not a disagreement. I'm just curious the thought process. 1, is a 9-3 SEC team a feasible option for you if things really get chaotic down the stretch? I don't really think there is one in the Big Ten that makes sense because it's been more top heavy. Whereas the SEC, there has been some, again, like Alabama or LSU this time next week will have 3 losses and they'll also have some pretty good wins.
Yeah. But when I look, at the Big Ten right now, the overall record, you've got 2 undefeated teams, Indiana and Oregon, which don't play each other. Ohio State, Penn State, both of them 7-1. And from there, it drops off, right? You've got Iowa at 6-3, Minnesota at 6-3, Illinois at 6-3. Do any of those 3 teams, do you think that they're going to make the playoffs? No, I don't think there's any chance that any of them do. And then you look at the SEC, and there's 6 teams that either have 1 or 7 teams, 1 or 2 losses. And I just look, Georgia, yeah, they could make the playoffs. Texas A&M, I think right now, probably not at 7-2.
They have to be. They finish with Texas. If they beat Texas and go 10-2, they're in.
Tennessee, Texas, which I've already got them in. LSU is 6-2. Ole Miss 7-2. Alabama 6-2. Like, there are some big time names with 2 losses, and like you mentioned, somebody's going to end up with 3 after this weekend. Is there a shot for an SEC team to be a 3-loss contender in the college football playoffs? I would say yes. The Big Ten, no.
I will say, I believe that the winner, I think right now, and this is a little bit of a cop out, so I'll just make a pick. I'll say Alabama wins this weekend, but I think the winner of Alabama LSU gets a spot over SMU. That would be the one probable switch I would make to yours right now. And again, I'll pick Alabama because I'll just say it.
You mean here's my other ACC team? Are you serious?
Oh, gosh, it's going to be so funny when like the graphic has the wrong logo in there.
Oh, it's going to happen.
Oh yeah, for sure. Here's my other question. Say Indiana is 11-1 and loses in Columbus by 7, and Penn State's 11-1. Who's ranked higher for you?
That's a tough question because their schedules are pretty much not that much different.
I think Penn State's been slightly better schedule, but Indiana's been more impressive with
more dominant. Yeah. I don't know.
I don't think 11-1 and 11. If they're both 11-1, I don't think we're talking about in or out.
Right.
But I do think that could be on that 8-9 border where you might
hosting or not.
Correct.
Yeah. Boy, I don't know. I would probably say right now, if the committee can take away logos and brands, We're all humans, right? And we all have biases and we all have preconceived notions of what teams are and aren't supposed to be. If you're able to remove all those, I think Indiana is the higher ranked team.
I don't love the concept of the eye test in most cases because I think that is clouded by sometimes the jerseys, the colors, the brands. But if it is that close and it's 11-1 versus 11-1, I think you got to go with the eye test. And I mean, honestly, my argument for that would be showing people that four play sequence at 20-13 inside the 2-yard line. I'd be like, nope, Indiana's better than that.
If Indiana is in that same position, sure. I mean, but that's the thing is you can't.
If Indiana's at the 2-yard line in Columbus, they're scoring. I just don't know if they're stopping Ohio State. It'll be a different style of game, most likely.
Yeah. Yes, it will be. I don't know.
Oh, boy, you had it 1st and goal at the 2, and you couldn't tie the game at home. And that's the other thing. If Indiana does keep it close against Ohio State, it's in Columbus.
Right.
So, yeah, it'll be fascinating. And I don't envy Ward Manuel's position in this. It's exciting, but it's also probably very stressful. And I'm sure we'll get the chance to talk to him at some point during it here on the podcast. But that is it for 7 from 77. On the podcast audio side, let's hear from Miles Hinton. Here on the video side, let's talk about kind of a somewhat short-term, somewhat long-term thing. I just want to kind of catch up on a few chats, by the way. I really enjoyed this one from John with an H. Sorry, it's spelled wrong. John Jansen. How good can Colorado be? Nebraska beat them.
I know. Trust that's the weirdness.
Handily.
I know. And so you look at, I mean, like, okay, so college kids are allowed to have a bad day. That was really bad. And on the flip side, you're allowed to have a great day. And so Nebraska did. And yeah, this is where I we're not talking about Colorado really being that good, but we're talking about the Big 12. Maybe it's just that bad because Colorado is a one-loss in conference team and they control their own destiny. If they win out, I mean, again, I don't know what the tiebreakers are, but they'd be in a position to play in the Big 12 championship game.
Yeah. And also it is a situation where you can improve. That is the one positive to this 12-team format is that you can get better. One loss at the beginning of a season does not end your season. No non-conference loss truly ends your season,
right?
Unless you're in a group of 5 situation. So in the power conference, you have a chance. Now, is there an argument that maybe that shouldn't be the case? Sure, right? 11-1 Penn State's going to feel a little bit hollow if they're in because they really, in all accounts, should have beaten Ohio State, or they had every opportunity to. I don't know if should is the right way of putting it, but
right. But they lost to a team that only has one loss, and that one loss that the team that they played was to the number 1 team in the country.
By a point on the road. Yeah,
right.
No. Also, Philip weighing in, letting us know how the line really feels about punters. Yes, John, that's been a consistent brand.
I've been very, very consistent on that.
Yeah, there's no for the brand. We're probably not having Pat McAfee on the show. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
All right, I want to talk about. Now we're in November, and we discussed after the Michigan State win that it was nice at the very least. Hey, we're not going to be super focused on the future. If Michigan loses to Michigan State, a lot of the conversation around Michigan football externally is about where this goes from here, how they shape the roster and revitalize this for 2025. The Oregon loss, I think, did that to an extent. So we each took, I have 3. John, 3? Do you have 3?
Yeah, I got 3.
Okay. We'll go back and forth of just the storylines that we're going to watch here down the stretch in November that have ramifications for right now and for next season, with probably more of a flash toward next season than now. John, I'll let you start with your first one. No, this is a pointless countdown. No set number. Just give me one of your first.
So I think the first one is it's going to be player evaluation, and it's player evaluation. And I talk about opportunities. We've talked about Will Johnson being hurt, and Jair Hill stepping up and taking up some of that slack. Now he's hurt. And we've seen other guys, step in. And when one guy goes down, it creates an opportunity. When you're playing against a Texas, against an Oregon, it's an opportunity to go out there and show what you've been working on, how good you are. It's a showcase to the entire country because they're nationally televised games, but more importantly, it's a showcase to the coaching staff of what you're doing. And we've had a chance to see some young players, whether it's Jair Hill in certain situations. We've talked about his improvement throughout the course of the year. Dom Nichols up front, he's gotten some run. And then it's really some of the younger freshmen that both assistant coaches, but more importantly, Sharon Moore has talked about. Mason Curtis. We saw him a lot against Oregon. I thought he played extremely well. And he was a guy, along with Josiah Edmond, who has been forced into duty with the injuries in the secondary, have been able to, one, earn the opportunity to be the next guy up. But then when somebody goes down, hey, you're in the game. You got to go. And it's about evaluating those guys and watching them improve. The opportunity for them to get live game reps. Linebacker Cole Sullivan, staying on the defensive side of things, is another guy that I think, especially at the end of the year when some of these guys have played enough that the red shirt's burned, but you start to get into the the final 4 games of the season, freshmen are start to be, will start to be playing better, start to understand the offense, defense, all of those things a little bit more. Andrew Sprague, in another guy that Sharon Moore has talked about for a couple of weeks. If with the injuries up front, if somebody else goes down, if Miles Hinton misses some time, or if Evan Link misses any time, it might be Andrew Sprague that goes in there, and you get a chance to see some of these players that could be impactful players next year, guys that they're counting on to be able to get an opportunity to play. Hogan Hansen, who we've seen throughout the course of the year at the tight end position. The USC game, he had the touchdown. He's played. We saw him at the end of the game against Oregon. Like, these are some of the guys, young players, freshman, sophomore. It's all about opportunity. And when players go down, or if they're just tired of who's in there and they just wanted to see what you can do in these final 4 games, it's all about opportunity.
Yeah. So my first one is kind of a specific example with where the season has gone, with the structure of this roster, with the realities of being a 5-4 football team coming off a national championship. It's likely that Michigan's going to mine the portal, the late high school recruiting, all of that for probably someone in every position group. Mm-hmm. I think there might be one position group that might have the biggest individual loss from it this year to next year. And also maybe the one I could see as the one that doesn't necessarily need reinforcements, how they play the rest of the year. That's the tight ends. Mm-hmm. Colston Loveland's going to be a massive, massive loss, of course. But with Hogan Hansen's emergence as a freshman, doing not quite to the level of what Colston Loveland did down the stretch as a freshman, but he's getting playing time. Zach Marshall, Marlon Klein as a guy who can take a big step moving forward. Not saying Michigan will just completely ignore that. They got to look at every position. But I'm fascinated to see how Michigan continues to go into the depth of the tight end position, especially when right now, Colston Loveland, in the NFL, we're seeing a lot of this with tight ends who aren't really true tight ends. A lot of the times they're just bigger wide receivers who are split out wide. I expect Loveland to be in a lot of ways that way in the NFL with a modernized offense, with a good quarterback, all of it. If you do elect to do that and you want to tap into your depth with tight ends closer to the line of scrimmage, here's an opportunity, because I think this time next year we could be talking about one of those guys, Klein, Hansen, Marshall, somebody else, as a budding star, as another really good Michigan tight end. So that's the one position for me where it says, hey, if they had to pick one position not to upgrade in the offseason, that one might be it for me, even though from a production standpoint, we talked about it. 38% of Michigan's catches, 43% of Michigan's receiving yards have come from Colston Loveland. Yet I like what I've seen from the depth behind him.
Mm-hmm. The next one that I would talk about, I guess this is more big picture stuff. It's going to be Sharon Moore evaluating his coaching staff. And, is this the offense? Is it operating the way that you want to see? And it's not just the play calling. It's the development of each individual position, the wide receivers, the offensive line, the running backs. There's some bright spots. And early on in the season, Khalil Mullins was a bright spot. Now Donovan Edwards has been a little bit more effective in the last couple of games. But where are they at in developing their players, in putting together game plans and ultimately calling plays to put players in position for success. Same thing on the defense. You go right down the list, and I think Sharon should be looking at every single individual players on the roster now, players in the transfer portal, but also evaluating and what does that mean for the final 3 games of the regular season. Are the players ready? Are the players given every advantage? And is the success or lack of because of talent and execution, or because of the position that the players have been put in?
Yeah, absolutely. My number 2 is, if there's been an area in this run that Michigan has had before this season of success where an underclassman was most likely to come in and make an impact early, I'd say it be at the defensive line and the secondary. Whether it was Will Johnson or Dax Hill before him, highly regarded recruits who made big time surges, or lesser known recruits like Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, gifts from the football gods, as Jim Harbaugh called them. The ability to make an impact because of the rotation, because of how many guys you need, because of some of the injuries in the secondary, and because of the needs for just how many snaps Mason and Kenneth have played this year. There will be additions to those 2 position groups, but is a Mason Curtis an emerging guy who Michigan can truly count on next season? We heard it from Sharon on Monday night's radio show, calling him a tackling machine. I know they love this guy. So for me, it's about, okay, who on that defensive line? Is it a Cam Brandt type? Is it, Ike Awuna, who's played more? I know he's an older guy, but he's still got eligibility after this year. Who are players that can step in and secure or put themselves in position to have healthy snap count expectations next year, or potentially starting spots, because the opportunities are there in 2 position groups where, hey, Michigan has proven they'll play true sophomores, they'll play true juniors, and they will develop first round type talents out of those spots. So, in an area where it's a little bit easier to be fluid with what you do personnel wise, who can set up to where we're talking about them significantly in the offseason heading into next year, who's already on the roster, who has eligibility left.
Right. And that's was kind of along the same lines as my number 3 is the players have all been an advocate. And this is not just the players at Michigan, players, all college football student athletes, an advocate for being able to transfer and no penalty, an advocate for NIL dollars. And now all of a sudden you're in a position where you've underperformed as a team at Michigan, and you better go out in these last 3 weeks and show that you don't need, at least you can count on me at my position, whether it's a wide receiver, because I think there's significant need there, quarterback, offense. I mean, like really at every position, like you mentioned, other than tight end, where they could use help. And if you've been a part of that, which all players are, that they want to be able to transfer, they also want to be able to go and if I want to make more NIL dollars somewhere else, that's fine. You also have to realize that Michigan has to operate as a program, as one that has a great, rich history of winning and winning at a high level. So if you don't want to go out and look for somebody to replace you, you better step up and start playing extremely good football from here on out. And it might be too little too late. They're going to add talent, whether it's through the incoming freshman class or the transfer portal. But I think this is that last chance to show that you can be the guy versus somebody that might be on another roster right now.
Was that your number 3, or do you have one more?
Yeah, no, that's my number 3.
Yep. I'll say this. For my number 3, it's what Michigan does in Columbus. And to me, Sharon Moore is on the very, very short list. I think if you had to name 3 to 5 individuals who are most singularly responsible for the turn in this rivalry from Ohio State's dominance to 3 straight for Michigan, Sharon Moore's on that list. Whether it's 3, 5, you can make the argument for 1. He's been that impactful from this time he started on this staff to the time where he was Jim Harbaugh's Ohio State scout, where he was watching Ohio State daily, weekly, all year, even in the season, getting ready. To now, what he did last year as an offensive line coach, offensive coordinator, and interim head coach, acting head coach, at home to win that third in a row. Teams that have not been nearly as good as Ohio State in Michigan history have won this game. For as at times significant the blowouts were during that run, remember the 2017 Michigan team had the football down by less than a full possession in the late stages and could have won that game at home. Michigan will be a heavy favorite in Columbus, and understandably and deservedly so. Ohio State's a one-loss playoff contender. Michigan's 5-4. But that does not mean that you don't have a chance to go and win that game. And I think it is a big portion of what the vibes will be like heading into the offseason, even if they don't win the game. Obviously, it's a pass-fail. You've talked about how much you think about the one you lost versus the three you won. Totally get it. But your ability to go down there and potentially end a coaching staff's tenure, to end an Ohio State playoff run, to waste, from all accounts, 8 figures worth of money to create that roster. You want to set the tone in the rivalry? You want to make sure that even in your down years, which is what Ohio State had done to Michigan for the previous 2 decades, even in your down years, you can go down there and give a scare or get a win. How this team over the next few weeks prepares for that game, that opportunity, to me will tell a lot about where the buy-in still is, which I think is still there. We saw in the second half against Oregon, the buy-in's still there, even if the season is rudderless in terms of playoff and Big Ten hopes. What do you do on November 30th in Columbus? Because worse Michigan teams have beaten Ohio State before. And even though it will not be as fulfilling as Mikey Sainer still running all over Houston on January 8th, if you win that game, you set Columbus into chaos, you potentially cost them a playoff spot, and you show that you can win that game when you haven't had a good year. To me, that is just as much about showing what this program will be in 25 and beyond than anything they can do schematically, personnel-wise, anything along those lines. And that's why, even in the 12-team playoff era, that game resonates in a way that few others do.
Yeah. I might have to have you be a part of the pep talk leading into that game, because you got me fired up. I agree with you. That would be an epic victory. A lot of work to be done between now and then. But emotion does play a part of this rivalry. And I don't think there's another sport where emotion plays as big of a part as it does in football. Emotion's not going to make you hold the snap count. It's not going to make you do a lot of things that you have to do to win. That's just simply coaching and its awareness as a player. But once that ball is snapped, yeah, I think emotion can play a huge part of a game such as that.
Yeah, we talked about it with that game. Michigan won last year, but Ohio State played a lot better than they did the previous 2 years.
Yeah.
It was not the progress that they wanted. And if Michigan goes down there and loses close, that's not going to make anybody feel better in the moment or in the immediate aftermath. But as long as you don't go down there and get blown out, I think that shows a lot of where the leadership is in all of this to close a frustrating season in a way that Michigan fans can appreciate and
Sure.
hopefully be proud of. So we'll see. There's a lot of work to be done. Let's hope it's not for bowl eligibility in that game. That would be helpful. But that's, to me, how this team sticks together for the next 3.5 weeks. It'll go a long way in determining. And again, I've got a lot of confidence in Sharon Moore and what his leadership brings to this, because again, he is as important as anybody in resurrecting this rivalry for Michigan. All right. Well, Indiana, this ends the non-Indiana radio
Yes.
here for this Tuesday. I will say I unfortunately will not be able to be there. I'll be remote because of basketball on Sunday. It's going to be a really fun atmosphere down there. I've talked about on these streams before that to me, nothing in sports is quite like the fact that when you have a fan base that hasn't done something in a long time with a chance to do it. But boy, it'd be nice to spoil it too. That's for sure.
It'd be nice to rip their hearts out.
Well, how about this? Here's what would be cool, right? Michigan wins, then they beat Ohio State and still make the playoff. I'd like to see them make the playoff. It's good for the Big Ten. If you have the 17th projected Big Ten team make the playoff, that's good for the league down the road in this 12-team format. Unquestionable.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, if they lose to Michigan, beat Ohio State, get in 11-1, let's do it.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
Yeah. All right. Anything else to share, John?
No, sir. Let's go. Hey, get ready for Bloomington.
No doubt. All right. We'll be back next Tuesday. Hey, go Blue.